G'day folks and welcome to Australian UFO Sightings official podcast. I'm your host Anthony Goodall and you're listening to Encounters Down Under. Here we invite guests on the show to tell us about their encounters with aliens and UFOs, where most of our episodes were streamed live from our Facebook page, which gave listeners the opportunity to ask questions to our guests regarding their encounter. If you have had an encounter and would like to be a guest on the show, please get in touch with us. You can send us a message through our Facebook page, Encounters Down Under, or send us an email at australianUFOsightings@outlook.com.au. Be sure to join us on Facebook and share with your friends and family to help us grow, and hopefully encourage others to come forward with their encounter. If you're an iTunes listener and a fan of the show, why not give us that 5-star rating and review, and you could have your review featured on the podcast. But enough of that, let's get into what you've been waiting for. So kick back, relax with your favourite beverage, and enjoy the show. Bill, can you hear us, mate? You there? No, you're still muted there, mate. Oh no, we lost him. We'll get him back on.
That was my fault. Yep.
Yeah, no, you're right. Bloody buttons, eh?
Yeah, no, it's the way the icons are coming up on the phone. Yeah.
No, that's right, mate. Yeah, look, we had to go and change away from the Zoom there, from the stupid thing that were interrupting us there last time there. So we've gone back to Messenger and using that one there. So hopefully it'll work pretty well tonight. I hope everyone can hear us and see us all right. So
have you got me right there? Or?
I've got you good, mate. We've got you there. We're working, I think.
Okay.
Mate, thank you very much for coming back on the show, mate. It was absolutely fantastic having you on there last couple of weeks ago. It was a great, awesome show there, mate, and people have been cheering for you to come back on. So thank you very much for coming back on the show. It's absolutely fantastic having you on.
Yeah, pleasure.
So let's try and go from where we left off there, mate. You're sort of dropping a few hints there, and I'm really interested on you're talking about this Mount Butler. Mate, can you tell us a bit about that? That's really got me curious on what was going on there with your experiences.
Yeah, well, Mount Butler was a place that really preoccupied me while I was at the University of New England. That's at Armidale, and Mount Butler was a small farming property just to the west, or actually southwest of Armidale and the university. And it was initially during 1972 that I got the first hint of something strange going on there at this little small farming property. It was actually the same day, earlier in the day of my own daylight disk sighting back in September of 1972, I had a member of the new Psychic Research Society that was had begun on the campus. You know, a lot of different clubs and groups and that kind of stuff that were covering all sorts of things, and a number of faculty members formed a psychic phenomena research group, mainly operating out of the rural science and psychology department, actually. So that was a bit unusual. And I got sort of roped into being chairman of the so-called Ghost and Poltergeist subcommittee. And I was happy to do that because back in those days, 73, 75, pretty much there wasn't this kind of strong belief or linkage in connection between UFOs and the paranormal or psychic phenomena, that kind of stuff. And so most of the serious kind of paranormal investigators didn't see a connection, but it was by 1975, and that's a few years after all this stuff sort of played out up in New England, Jacques Vallée was writing books like The Invisible College, or it came out as a paperback called UFOs, The Psychic Solution. And he was basically demonstrating back then that there was a very weird kind of aspect to the whole UFO phenomenon. It wasn't just nuts and bolts, craft and that kind of stuff. There was a real unusual sort of array of strange phenomena that, for want of a better word, would fit into the paranormal. And it was on the same day as my own daylight UFO sighting on the campus, and I had that around about sunset or near sunset. But earlier in the day, I was approached by a member of the group who knew that I was chairman of the Ghost and Poltergeist subcommittee, and he tells me, something pretty weird happened out at a place called Mount Butler. I didn't know where Mount Butler was at that stage. I certainly found out pretty quickly. But apparently on the campus, on this property, I'll just read you very quickly from an account I've got here. Early on the same day as my sighting, a student told me of some unusual events that occurred about 3 a.m. that morning on a property to the west of Armadale, Mount Butler, and apparently involved a bizarre apparition looking like a monk in a shroud. The student was acquainted with me through meetings of the fledgling University Psychic Phenomena Society. Later, I started to explore what was going on out there, and if people go to my blog site, which is theosfiles.blogspot.com, and check out an article there dated the May 20th, 2021. There's a post there called Experiencing UFO and UFO Hot Zones, Mount Butler, Turingham and the Skinwalker Beat. And in there I explore the similarities between what's happening on Skinwalker Ranch, what happened at Mount Butler and at Turingham, particularly during the 70s. Now these areas sort of run hot and cold, but certainly during the early part, middle of the 1970s, it was running red hot, and it was really quite a strange sort of situation. But essentially what took place, let me get to it. One of the students, during the early morning darkness on September 15th, 1972, same day as my sighting, 3 university students were staying on this property at Mount Butler, and they were just talking and listening to music, and they heard a commotion amongst the farm animals outside, and one of them went outside to investigate. What he saw caused him to call to the others, come outside quickly. There, floating in a semicircle near the house, was like a monk-like apparition, like a classic sort of monk in a long robe with a dark void for the face. No limbs noticed, and a black void was present where the face would have been. And one of the students, Greg, apparently made a sudden move, and the other 2 thought they saw the apparition vanish in a flash of light, and it was their impression that this flash of light travelled towards Greg and entered him at chest height. Puzzled, the 2 men went over to Greg and found him in a much distressed state. He was shaking almost uncontrollably and was inarticulate except for garbled attempts to convey that he felt really sick inside. His friends helped him inside. He stayed in much the same condition until they ventured outside again. 2 of the farm horses galloped up to meet them, and one of them was a favourite of Greg's, came up to him and the other 2 students, and then they thought that they saw a flash of light leave Greg, enter the horse, and then leave it. So I'm telling you, this is pretty weird. And then it entered the horse and then left it, dissipating into the darkness. The horse reared up and fled away. The 2 men now found that Greg was no longer distressed. The 2 friends came to think that the apparition was the spirit of Greg's father, who had died a few months earlier, and it had possessed him. Now, whatever the explanation, my investigation at the time made me feel that the students had a pretty genuinely unsettling experience. So I interviewed them all to get an idea of what was going on. But Graham, another student who started living on the property in 1973, and he began to see strange sights in the area, particularly since he was starting to finish late because he was working as a cleaner in town. During 1973, he had at least 8 UFO sightings. Now most people think, if you have regular UFO sightings, you're not very reliable or whatever, or you might be seeing things. But back in those days, that was kind of the general attitude. But there were a number of sightings that he had, which sort of allowed me to authenticate the fact that he was having some genuine experiences. And just to describe it, sort of one of them, March 73, is coming home from the university about 1:30 in the morning after completing a radio program on the student radio network, and he drove down along the Bundara Road turn to the left onto the road that eventually leads out towards Mount Butler. Just as you pass the University Ionosphere Research Station, that was kind of like a huge grid of metal poles with wires attached. And what they were doing, the university was conducting bouncing radio waves at a certain frequency off the ionosphere, and they were just studying basically the ionosphere. And he stopped to answer a call of nature. I was just sort of looking up in the sky, and then I noticed that the sky was sort of shifting about 5 or 6 lights, and they were just sort of moving slowly in a curve formation, like 5 lights in an arc. They were only fractionally moving, and they moved very slow for about 5 minutes. And all of a sudden, they just sort of all slid around out of the arc and into a straight line, and they all just went and accelerated rapidly towards the south. Now, the thing is, I was in contact with the Sydney group, or a Sydney group, that had logged a report from Rozelle in New South Wales, that's in suburban Sydney, and on the 24th of March 1973, at about 1:30 in the morning, there was a sighting of 5 flat yellow lights travelling in a loose V or arc formation, moving quickly from south to north. Now, this wasn't publicised, this report, and it only came to my notice because I was familiar with the group director and all that kind of stuff, and was receiving that kind of information. So Graham, back in near Armidale at Mount Butler, certainly wouldn't have been aware of that report, and yet given the fact that it was late in March 73, and his sighting was late in March 73, around about the same time, 1:30 a.m. in the morning, involved about 5 lights in the sky and moving in an arc kind of thing. There was a lot of correlation. So that provided me with a kind of a correlation that, yeah, okay, at least one of his sightings being possibly verified by somebody else, or somebody seeing something very similar. So I started to pay a bit more attention to his reports. And there were, on the property at Mount Butler, and he started staying there for a period of time. There were a number of different objects, golden balls of light that he called plasmic balls, and then there were these were caught amongst the treetops, and there were green lights as well, all sorts of things that were seen, and floating balls of light. But the most spectacular sighting he had was during early October 1973. Now, once again, he's returning home early morning from his cleaning job. He's on the dirt road opposite the research station receiver again, and right in the middle of the windscreen, an object seemed to float up. And I'm quoting from his description: "I stopped the car immediately. This thing, best I can describe, it was like a cigar or like a French loaf. It was fairly regular in shape, except it was sort of tapered at the ends, and on each end of it there seemed to be a type of yellow light, but one end was sort of greeny and the other end was red, and the middle seemed to be the same yellow. It didn't seem to be very far away. In fact, this thing was so close that it took up the entire width of the road, and it was certainly below tree height level, top of the trees. So it was very low and very close, and directly in front of him. And he had no impression of movement or sound. He just watched it for about 10 or 15 seconds, and it seemed to be orientated in a kind of an oblique angle like this. Then it rotated itself in front of him 4 times, and then seemed to then kick off straight like that and disappeared into the night. So here's this thing of massive size directly in front of him, doing some unusual manoeuvres. That was sort of kind of startling. So if people go and look at that link, I've got pictures there of photographs I took with him on the site, and you get an impression of how big the object was. So it's pretty substantial size. And there are all sorts of other things that occurred. Now this starts to make it sound a little bit like the Skinwalker Ranch and other locations. There were like Earth energy type episodes that I called at the time. They even had an episode which was quite bizarre where they call it the strangest day when the mountain itself spoke. That's what they described it as. Pretty weird.
It
They
is
said
strange.
that, yeah, a distinct humming turned into a bush chant. There was all these sort of natural kind of noises starting to amplify, and it got into such a huge, massive cacophony of sound, and it seemed to have it seemed to give everybody a state of euphoria, and then it was like, to them, it was like the hillside was singing in a choir. Others felt it was like a sense of communication. And they came down off the mountainside and returned to the barn area. And just as they got to the barn area, they looked around and they saw 10 falling stars shooting across the evening sky. And they concluded, we just went up to see the sunset like we normally do, and the mountain spoke to us. It was like a sense of humming, a sense of power, manifesting itself in noise, and then it changed from a sort of familiar noise, like a generator noise, or more sort of human, more vocal noise, a wash of sound. The other was more crudely primitive. To the group, it was distinctly far stranger than typical Australian bush hums like cicadas and other sources of bush noise. And other people reported phenomena like the presence of space or time warps on the property where a particular locality would change significantly in perspective. Some areas of landscape seemed to quiver as if it would seem to want to shift around, and there was shifting one's location would return the effect to normal. So you'd be looking at a location and it appeared to shift and shimmer, you'd moved, and then it would just sort of return back to its natural appearance. So, you know, for want of a better word, people were thinking of it like a window at that time. This is kind of like what John Keel and others, for those that are familiar with him, was describing, like they used to call them window areas. Now, this is the kind of stuff that goes on in a lot of different locations, particularly best known, I guess, through the Skinwalker Ranch, that kind of stuff, but areas around the Blue Mountains, near Sydney, Kempsey, Coonabarabran, St George in Queensland, Tully, Litchfield, Echuca down near the Murray, in New South Wales, Victoria border, Wycliffe Wells, the Grampians, Toowoomba, but none of those came close to the intensity of what I was experiencing, which I described previously at during 1973. That was full on night after night. And, so that's what I call a very intense sort of hot zone. And to summarise it, we had agile nocturnal lights, possible landing events, aerial objects seen, unusual auditory phenomena, van and truck noises. Whenever those occur, we'd often get it associated with clocks stopping, electric clock stopping, and that kind of stuff. There were visionary experiences like dreams and close-up encounters, that kind of stuff. All sorts of things. Some of these things were photographed, and a lot of it was personally witnessed by myself and others that I dragged up from the university as well.
That would be incredible.
It was a pretty crazy time. I'd love for it to happen again with that kind of intensity, but we just got lucky. It was just really, really full on. The trouble with that area was that it was going through a bit of a transition. A lot of was the period of the early 70s, and a lot of I guess people were getting into hippie communes and that kind of stuff, and a lot of properties were being bought up from some of the traditional owners, and so within a decade, the whole dynamic of the area had changed, and there was only a handful of people that I became familiar with that actually were still living in the location. I think previously I described the anecdote of rolling up to, this was back around about 2010 or something like that. I roll up to the corner store, or the little store. Not many houses in Turingham. You blink and you miss it, but I pull up and I go into the store and said, "Oh, anything interesting, unusual, strange happening around here?" Which might seem a bit of a weird request. And, "Oh, no, not around here, mate." The young lady says to me, and I said, "Oh, it's interesting. I used to know the original store owner, I mentioned the name. It turned out that this woman talking to me was her daughter, and her mum had passed away. And she said, "Oh, are you Bill?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm Bill Chalker." He says, "Oh, yeah, Mum used to talk about you all the time, because she and I used to sit out the front of the store for all hours of the night, sort of sitting back, sharing a beer or two or whatever, or other drinks, watching the lights cavort over the top of Boney Mountain directly in front of us." We got bored after a while because every time we tried to set up equipment to take photographs or monitor them, these things would just take off and disappear. And it seemed to display an invasiveness that went beyond mere chance. Like we didn't have the kind of equipment you have today, the lightweight stuff. You'd set up a heavy-duty tripod to get rid of camera shake, that kind of stuff. And we'd set all that up night after night. It'd be happening in front of us. The local name for the mountain was Boney Mountain, it's called, but I think it was called actually Copeland or something of that nature. And it would appear, or these lights would appear, travel along a high speed, stop dead on a dime, turn up, and go back, and then forward as if they'd missed something, and then it would drop like a stone behind the mountain, that kind of thing. All this kind of thing was happening night after night.
Wow.
So you get all your gear, you get your gear set up, ready to take photographs, and as soon as you do that, it's gone, and then it starts playing games behind you. So we'd have to turn the equipment around, and this would happen so often it just drove us crazy.
So a bit of shake about it.
Yeah, but the only people that really got decent photos was the local guy who'd set his camera up on top of the roof of his house. This is very early on, and he got some shots of what was being seen, and in some of them there's not so much camera movement, and you see a dish-shaped type of object there. And we were seeing lights, seeing them as lights, but we were also seeing them as silver discs, that kind of thing. So, but the weird, just to give you an idea of how intensely weird it got, and again, I encourage people to have a look at that link. Just go to my blog site and type in Tyringham and you'll find it.
I'll just try and find it for them, and I'll throw the link up in the chat there. If you, just before you go on, mate, just want to check your connection there to your phone, because I think you're just getting a bit of interference there with the audio jack there. I think that's what the noise is. You get a bit of a noise coming through every time you talk. Or it could be that. Or it might be just the microphone part. Maybe.
Is that any better?
That's a lot better.
Yeah.
But I don't think you want to hold your hand there like that.
No, call a mask. Yeah, I'll put it up closer up here or something like that. How's that sound?
Nah, it's not much better at all.
We should have stuck to Zoom, bugger the interruptions, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe next time I'll try and sound a bit better. I've really got to do some work on this there and try and get something that's really efficient.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. So I was going to ask some questions there. So these objects sort of things, obviously you can't determine or you can't interpret them as min lights or anything like that, because there's probably a bit too much intelligence compared to what other min lights are doing.
Well, I've spent a lot of time up at Butler and places like that, where the home of the Min and all that kind of stuff. And the main thing you get about the Min lights is that they seem to be very evasive. Like you start to approach them and they go away, whereas these things would put on a show. One of the classic ones that I described was one that went straight across like that, stopped as if it missed something, went up in an arc like that, came back, and then went into the middle position, sat there, and then dropped like a stone behind the mountain. That's not typical Min light type stuff. And plus, we were seeing objects as well, and things that seem to appear to be UFO sightings, things that seem to have structure, craft that appear to be large angular size that would land behind the mountain, things that were quite weird, like a little village nearby. These are both very small places, though, just like little small service centres to service the surrounding farms. And on one of those places, it was only a few kilometres away from Tyringham, and I'm talking 1 or 2 kilometres, was a place called Dundaraban. There, the locals were also experiencing UFO sightings, So most of the people in that locality were reporting them, but they were very reluctant to report it to anybody like media or anything like that. And the only reason that I was hearing about these reports was that generally I was staying on a property called Mollydale. You won't find Mollydale very well now because a lot of that area has been taken over by a big agricultural conglomerate. But I remember recently going to the Sydney Royal Easter Show, this is pre-COVID, and I noticed a place, a stand there, a farming stand at the show that was called Mollydale Wool or something like that. And I just sort of asked, where are you guys from? He says, oh, we're on a small little property near Tyringham. And I thought, Tyringham? Yeah, and then I sort of asked the question, what, you guys actually live there at Tyringham? They said, well, we used to. And I said, well, why are you asking? And I said, are you aware of some of the strange things that happened at Tyringham? And then they said, what kind of strange things? And I said, oh, really weird shit, like UFOs. And I said, yeah, you were aware of it, and it does keep happening, but very intermittently, not at the same intensity as what was happening during 1973, or as far as we can tell. But, and as I said earlier, the whole dynamic, the whole nature of the community within that area has changed a lot. As I said, the actual property where most of the action was taking place, at least for me personally, the Mollydale property itself, has been taken over. When I last drove up there, I drove in up to where the property was, and I don't think it was still standing. At that time, it was up behind the local store and up on the hills, and you'd go over the hill, and the whole house was surrounded by a big wire fence to keep cattle out of the immediate area of the immediate perimeter of the house. And there was some pretty weird stuff going on. And now, over several months, I'm sort of saying I got reports of about 44 nocturnal light reports and about 23 that appeared to be like aerial objects. There were 5 clear reports of apparent UFO landings, another 15 that seemed to land, but they were so a bit further away that we weren't sure what the hell was going on there. But there was also other strange stuff going on, like auditory phenomena, things that we christened them phantom truck noises. It was just really weird, and electrical type clock stopping incidents, and what seemed to be psychic and paranormal events. Now, to give you an idea, I'm going to describe to you, rather than just rely on memory, I'll go on my original report.
Yeah. What's the headline of that one, so I can just find the link for it?
Okay. If you go to roll up again. Yeah, it's Thursday, May 20th, 2021, and it's called Experiencing UFO/UAP Hot Zone, Mount Butler, Tyringham, and the Skinwalker Beat. So Experiencing UFO/UFO UAP Hot Zone, inverted commas.
All right, I'll find it, and then I'll share it to the chat there so people can go and get straight onto it. Yeah.
Now, when I'm referring to hot zones, I mean those areas where there's an extraordinary depth of UFO phenomenon being experienced. That they would also call you'd call them UFO flap areas, but they are much more very localized UFO flaps. Very small localities. Only a few square miles or several kilometres square, that kind of thing. And luckily for me, the first person who reported this was a local electronics technician who lived on the property at Tyringham, and he had heard that there was some weird guy, namely me, at the University of New England, Earl Page College, that was interested in UFOs. You could call him and he might look into it. And so he contacts me and he starts talking to me about it. And I said, well, how long ago did this start to take place? A year or two back? And he said, no, it's happening now, every night. I said, what? Are you serious? And I said, He says, yeah, no, it's going on every night. And being the usually impoverished university student, I didn't have a car at that stage, but I used to hitchhike up there, or he'd go through and pick me up, and we'd go down up together, and I'd stay the weekend on the property, and he'd lend me his ute, and I'd drive around the whole area all night. Like everybody in the area generally went to sleep around about 10 o'clock at night. It was like like a cemetery at night. Very very little activity because mostly farming people. But some pretty weird stuff happened after 10. I can tell you that from personal experience. Just to give you an idea of it. Now, for those that are kind of serious UFO investigators, this kind of thing is probably not going to be that unusual for them. Like I've encountered this kind of stuff very frequently in a lot of different localities around Australia, worldwide, in fact, all sorts of different flap areas. But for me, this has a lot of personal interest because, I was there, I was experiencing all this kind of stuff myself. And here we go. Right. I'm just trying to get to the account of the weirdest night. So, for me personally. It's a fairly detailed account. I put a lot of stuff into this account. Yeah, there's a lot to read there, but I'll just go through one account. Yeah, one of the most extraordinary nights for me personally in the Turingham flap took place on August 23rd, 1973, at about midnight on the Mollydale property. Now, it was my habit that he knew I'd borrow his ute, and I'd often go for a drive roaming around the valley. And one of my rules was that I'd never tell anybody what I personally experienced. I kept it all to myself. I was just like a human vacuum cleaner. I just wanted to know what other people saw, and I didn't want to tell them what I saw if I thought it might influence what they told me. So I kept a log of everything that was happening. Now, at about midnight, and as I described earlier, the property itself had the house had a big wire fence about 10 feet high with a gate, mainly to keep the livestock away from the house. And I walked up to near the gate, and I'm thinking I might take a drive, but then I'm thinking I get up, and this is about midnight. I noticed a bright white light in the south-southeast between the trees, and if you look at a bright light at night long enough, you get what's called scintillation, and you can get this autokinesis effect where you get movement. But this was quite a substantial light, seemed to be coming through the trees, and seemed to be like a beam of light coming down through the trees and shining onto the house. Look back to the house, I could see that the whole house was lit up. I thought, well, what's going on there? But and then the light and the beam suddenly disappeared at about midnight. A dull silvery object, had the angular size, you could make it out to be like a silvery disc, passed overhead from the south-southeast, from near where the light had been amongst the trees, passed over, and then it just seemed to be a consistent solid body, about 3/4 of an inch at arm's length. So that's pretty big. And it certainly wasn't a satellite, too big to be a satellite, and moving a lot faster than Skylab, that was prevalent at the time. And I'd seen Skylab pass over several times from that location, and got used to a lot of the stuff that people would say. It was a lot bigger than Skylab. But a few minutes later, while standing at the wire house gate, and if you read this new book out of George Knapp and Cole Kellner and James Lukatsky called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, brand new book, you can it tells what the Defence Intelligence Agency did at Skinwalker Ranch, and this one of the things that happened with some of the Defence Intelligence Agency thing had me thinking straight away of this event. I'm standing at the gate thinking, do I go for a drive? Anyway, I experienced this localised body of cold air. I stepped back 2 or 3 feet and was back into the warmer air I'd been in. I was soon able to determine that this distinct body of cold air was of a quite definite and rigid, confined volume. It appeared quite suddenly, and after a few minutes dissipated very quickly. What it was like a column of cold air, like a cylinder, just right near the gate. I think I could touch it and feel it and work out its dimension. I thought, this is pretty weird. You know, little drafts of air don't get that localised and solid like that. It was really quite strange. Anyway, I'm starting to think, yeah, getting pretty weird. Maybe I'm a bit too tired to go for a drive, check up the local neighbourhood. So I start to put this down to, you know, maybe I'm a bit tired. Anyway, and then so I decided to go to sleep, and this is about 12:40. After about 10 or 20 minutes, I'd gone to sleep at the back of the house, and Warwick, Ford, the electronics technician on the property, he starts to hear a weird whirring noise like the other noises that we christened phantom truck noises, and coming from about 400 yards away from the house in the direction of the water pump. And that was a scene of multiple witness sightings of 2 oblong lights a few weeks earlier. And we noticed that the electric clock was about 11:40, and that it cut out. Apparently, for some unknown reason, it was running an hour slow. So the actual time was about 12:51 a.m. Now, the noise consisted of a fluttering harmonic pitch lasting for about 20 minutes and increasing and decreasing in revs associated with the distance. It was about 400 cycles a second, similar to a generator. And as the pitch of the noise increased, the sound softened, and it seemed as though the noise was moving around, and then it got really annoyingly loud to the point where Warwick, the noise started to frighten him. You know, it was getting so close, and it sounded as though it was moving around about 400 yards away or about half a mile away. Thought it was a truck at first, but there were no echo effects, and we got pretty used to trucks passing through the area. You could easily distinguish from these noises. And quite often, a lot of the so-called phantom truck noises sounded like a swarm of buzzing bees, that kind of thing, you know, and this has been widely reported in a lot of locations. Anyway, and at that point, just as the thing was getting really loud, the electric clock, stops. And then he listens for another 15 or 20 minutes and saw nothing. As he was about to get up and wake me up, the noise died away. Now, Warwick's wife, Sandra, had been a little sick with the flu at the time, and earlier in the night she experienced some sort of strange dream impression, the likes of which she had never had before. And even when the flap was at its height, she'd never had any conscious inclination of such a mental impression. But we're sitting there around the breakfast table, and she wasn't feeling that well, and Warwick's there baiting her and saying, "Tell Bill about your dream. Tell Bill about your dream." Oh, he doesn't want to know about my bloody dreams. And he says, you know, just tell him. And so she tells me, and it occurred at about the same time I was actually outside in reality, experiencing the cold column of air and observing the light and the silvery object that I described earlier, i.e. about midnight. Sandra was half awake, feeling listless. And then she saw in her mind's eye, she thought, the impression of like a transparent disc with people inside, looking like it was in the negative. and a classic edge-on disc shape. And this thing seemed to be about 10 feet in diameter, and she had the impression that it had little structural material involved in the object. There were 2 or more occupants apparently at work comfortably inside the transparent disc. Now, she said she first saw the disc near the water tank, quite close to where I was in reality. It followed the old tree line of the grass, travelling about 10 feet above the ground, finally disappearing over the hills to the south-southeast. Now, she said that the impression was really vivid, but she didn't think there was much value in me reporting her dreams. And I have a sketch there that I did showing the locations, all the events and the correlations, the locations with it. So it was kind of like a shared vision. She's having a vision, and I'm outside in reality experiencing and seeing this and that kind of stuff. So pretty weird. Anyway, at about 4 a.m, I was woken up by a constant droning noise, like a plane passing nearby at low altitude, but with no echo effects. A lady staying there also heard it, and I couldn't work out what it was. I went outside to figure out what it was, and it got really intense, droning away above me, and at that point it just seemed to dissipate. So I couldn't figure out what the hell it was, but Warwick said when I casually mentioned that part of it, that I'd heard the truck noise, and Warwick said that the electric clock had stopped at around about 3:20 in the morning. So he thought that he thought he could hear the droning noise a little bit, but he's listening to it from the bedroom where I was actually outside trying to witness it and pick up where it was coming from. Anyway, that's just kind of typical of some of the things that happened there. There were multiple witness events and all sorts of apparitional phenomena, that kind of stuff, weird lights, that kind of stuff. So when the Skinwalker Ranch came into popular vogue a decade or two back, for me, when I listened to what was being described happening on the property, it was like deja vu to me, like, oh yeah, that sounds awfully familiar. And if you take the trouble to read the new Skinwalker at the Pentagon book that's just been published this year, and there's another article I did recently, which you can find called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon and its strange correlates with cases from the Oz Files. In there, I described the comparisons between what the Defence Intelligence Agency experienced when they went to the Skinwalker Ranch and what I experienced with others at Tyringham back in the 70s. So there's a lot of interesting correlations there that need to be looked at. So I agree with people like Dr. James Lakatsky that, I agree with Dr. James Lakatsky that we should be looking at UFOs and paranormal.
I just got a bit of an interruption here at the moment. I've got a little visitor. So, come here. Can you say hello? No. You don't want to say hello?
Hello.
You can say hello to Bill. Hello. No, Finn was shy.
Good.
So, this is my little girl, Rachel. Say hello.
Yeah. Hello.
She's been very shy. All right, miss. You going to go back out? Thank you. Close the door. Thank you.
Yeah.
So going on all that with the, got a bit of a weird aspect between like the paranormal thing and as well as the UFO thing. Have you guys, like, over the years of your research, determined that there's some sort of connection between the paranormal and the UFO world?
To me, there's absolutely no doubt that there is some correlation going on there. Exactly what it all means, God, yeah, I'd love to know. But when you get into these very intense UFO flaps, particularly localized ones in small remote communities, this kind of stuff is quite weird. Just to give you an example of another one, just at Tyringham during '73, this one is seriously weird. Where what have we got here? It kind of really goes to the heart of it in many ways. I'll leave people to read the accounts there in more detail, but there's so many of them. Yep. Okay. Right. Now, the following incident seems to be more pertinent to the UFO activity unravelling around Turingham and Durham to the south now. There was a family there that were originally living in Sydney, and the wife, Dorothy, kept having these unfathomable preoccupations with daydreams of seeing transparent people discs here. She's living in Sydney, and keeps seeing this daydream, or experiencing this daydream of seeing transparent people discs flying across the sky. And these seem to come in unrelated impressions, often quite vivid. She had no explanation for these dream impressions. She gave next to no thought about UFOs or all that kind of stuff. That sort of stuff didn't interest her. Anyway, she would often look outside her window at a Sydney residence dreaming, and she'd get the impressions of a country scene, grass, bushland. This only occurred when she used to look out a northern window, and she'd see what it looked like to her were not UFOs, she interpreted them like missiles, soaring, dipping across the sky. And she couldn't figure out what was the point of this, this daydream she kept having, looking at as if she was looking out this window and seeing a country scene, grass, bushland. Anyway, soon after, near the end of 1972, the family moves from Sydney to Cockatoo Creek, which is just to the north of Turingham, very close. And her husband soon starts making extensions to the house, and had built on a new kitchen on the northern side of the house. Just after these extensions were completed, Dorothy's standing at the kitchen window facing north, and she suddenly realises that this is the same country scene that she had often seen in her Sydney suburban daydreams, but without the missile. And this scared her a little bit, and at the same time she got the impression that maybe this was like something like this was going to happen in the local area, that the silver missile would start turning up.
Yeah,
this was about 5 or 6 months before the whole area became besieged by, inverted commas, unknown missiles or UFOs, whatever you want to call them. So, so that's how weird it can get. That to me is a fairly strong precognitive kind of dream impression that relates to the location. That they were besieged by balls of light and this auditory bees buzzing around the locality and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't just Turingham itself, it was the whole immediate area having all this strange stuff going on. And the only reason they were telling me about it was that they trusted Warwick, the electronics technician, and they would talk to him and he would pass it on to me with their permission, and I'd go and interview them. And kept it all pretty close to the chest and trying to figure out what's going on. And there were so many of these cases going on. And the local group in Sydney started to hear about this, and they contacted me and said, "Oh, we'd love to come up and check it out." And I said, "Yeah, sure, come on up." And this is how I met a dear friend of mine who's now passed away, but David Bushing, and he was ex-SAS, so a very tough guy, and the team turns up, and I thought really professional looking and all that kind of stuff. Pull back the canvas of the station wagon, and it's half full of Coca-Cola bottles. And this was David's one vice. He'd drink so much Coca-Cola. But he and I got on like a house on fire, and we spent a lot of time together in Turingham, and one of the places that was really quite strange is another correlation to an event that the Defence Intelligence agencies that went to the Skinwalker Ranch had. They talked about experiencing this incredibly intense fear sensation at a particular location. Now, David and I had gone out to the back of Turingham to investigate a UFO sighting about 10 o'clock at night, and as I said previously, most people in the area would go to sleep by that time, but we had walkie-talkie kind of things going, contact with Warwick back at the property, and he would contact the local property owner that were outside of his property, because we thought we could see this weird light that it was hovering and putting down a kind of a beam of light and a domed area of illumination on the ground. And the property owner answered Warwick and said, no, all the lights are out here. And he switches the light on and we could see where the light was, but this wasn't what we were looking at. Anyway, another light appeared on the hillside just to the rear of the property, and Warwick and David Bushing and I decided we're going to go up the hill, and we saw this light go down behind the hill. We thought we're going to go up and check that out. And so we're on foot, and David's wife's back in the car, Penny, and we're heading up the hill, and we're just getting up towards the top of the hill where we're getting close to where we have a clear view of what's over the hill. And then we both kind of looked at each other suddenly. We both, as it turned out, simultaneously had this really severe, intense, overwhelming sense of fear. Now, we're looking at each other thinking, what's happening? And David mentioned that he was ex-SAS, so very tough dude, not prone to being scared. I wasn't either. I got pretty familiar with the locality, thought I knew everything, all the bush noises going on and whatever. But both of us had this really overpowering sense of dread and fear. This is the same thing that the Defence Intelligence Agency guys that were on the Skinwalker Ranch reportedly experienced as well. So there was a lot of correlations going on. We're talking decades apart, and the other side of the world. And Dave and I looked at this and we're thinking, what are you feeling? And he says, well, tell you the truth, Bill, I'm scared shitless, and and I said, I feel the same. Do you think we better go? We'll go back down the hill. I think something doesn't want us to go over the hill. Anyway, we go back to the car, and then as we go down the hill, the feeling dissipates. We thought, oh, bugger this, we're going back up the hill. And so after about 5 minutes, we go back up the hill and we don't experience anything. Think, what's going on? We walked around the location, went over the hill, nothing there. So that's the kind of thing. There was just so many things going on during that 1 year at Turingham. It was just remarkable. I write about it a bit in the Oz Files, my book that I published back in '96. So that kind of area is, I think, like the kind of thing that researchers out in the field should jump on when they learn about it. If anybody out there has come across that kind of thing happening in Australia, I'd love to hear about it. So.
Yeah, it's not the first time I've actually heard of people experiencing this tremendous fear that deters them from continuing on. Like there's one story I was listening to on a program that I listened to where he's on a farm property and he had to go down, check the dam or check the cattle or something like that. I can't remember the full story to it, but as he was approaching down towards the water's edge of where one of the dams were, he kept gaining this fear of uncertainty. Next minute, it sort of turned into fear, and then as he kept going, it just turned into absolute terror that he had to turn around and go away. And then same thing, it sort of dissipates as he got further and further away. But by the time, he was too scared to go back down there by himself anyway, so he's like, nah, I'll wait till tomorrow to go back down there. And he reckons he went down next morning down to the dam there, and there was a depression in the grass near the dam there. So it sort of makes you wonder, how can they do something like this to deter you from coming any closer to where they're doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of describe like infrasound or whatever that sort of can be beamed into a person's sort of personal space and cause them to have irrational fear and that kind of stuff. And obviously there's military applications there, well and truly. If you can scare your enemy away, what better thing to do than having to engage with them and fight with them, that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
but we certainly had no feelings that there was the military or whatever wandering around the area. This remote farming community, and you don't expect military activities, in this sort of dairy territory and cattle farms and all that kind of stuff. Particularly at 10 o'clock at night. And I'd been there off and on for months, so knew the area quite well, and certainly didn't experience anything. Just to give, I'll just describe another case.
Just while you're trying to find that, what are your thoughts on the telekinesis side of things? Like people report that their beings or whatever they might be are experienced with telekinesis or any thoughts on that?
By telekinesis, you mean what, the lifting of things?
That's probably one. Telepathy. That's the one I'm thinking of.
Telepathy. Yeah. Well, there are literally thousands of entity cases, and I'm not sort of dealing with abduction cases. That's a separate category in the sense that there are literally thousands of those cases as well. But separately, just dealing with entity cases in association with UFOs and that kind of thing. Telepathy seems to be the name of the game, or what we interpret as telepathy. Not a great deal of speech going on, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of correlations to that kind of thing. So, telepathy is quite common. I gave a lecture or a series of lectures on the paranormal connection. And that seemed to be so popular, I was asked to do it 3 or 4 times in 1 year. And the lecture just got bigger and bigger because there's so much different content. And the research into this aspect has been going on for literally decades. It's nothing new. We were looking at it during the 70s. Excuse me. There was this paranormal connection evident back in the 50s, the 40s. I think various researchers have said even Kenneth Arnold, the guy that kicked off the whole flying saucer thing back in 1947, he had strange paranormal type of events taking place that seemed to follow him home. And,
visitor. Hang on. Hey, hang on. Sorry, mate. We've got another visitor. Hey.
I hear a noise in the snake cage.
Okay, here is noise in the snake cage. Just give me a minute there, guys. I'm going to sort these children out, and he's back in a minute. You can continue on there, Bill. I can still hear you, mate.
I'll keep talking.
Yeah, you keep talking.
You keep yourself engaged. I'll take the show over. The one of the interesting cases here was that at Nora Head on the Central Coast, there was a location called Soldiers Point, and during 1975, there was a young teenage group that 3 guys and a girl camping on the local beach at Soldiers Point, and they had started a fire, and to keep the fire going, 2 of the blokes had gone into a ravine near where they were camping, excuse me, and retrieved wood from a ravine, and then they brought this wood back and started pouring onto the fire. And as soon as the fire took off, that's when things got seriously weird. All 3 of the men, I said there were 3 young men and a young lady, and they were there on a spearfishing trip, and they were just aware that out of that ravine, or at least the men were aware, that there were these small balls of light coming out of the ravine and approaching them. Now, problem with this is we appear to have selective perception because the girl never saw anything. What she witnessed was the three young men absolutely terrified by whatever they were experiencing. And the two men that had gone down into the ravine seemed to be the main target of these balls of light. And it appeared as though these balls were coming out of the ravine and proceeding to attack the two men that had gone down into the ravine that collected the wood for the fire. And this went on for many minutes. These small objects, like orbs that had sort of things that looked like little rotating wings or propellers inside them, and they kept coming and swarming. And bear in mind, this was 1975, long before drones and all that kind of stuff, and it was seriously weird. Now the other gentleman, hello, the other gentleman had.
Road trial. Yes, I am talking, mate.
What's
He's
his
got a
name,
road
Dad?
trial. That's Bill. Say hello, Bill.
Hello.
Road trial. He suppose we can go to bed. Come on, bed, mate. Let's go. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Oh, there we go. Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Dad, you know he's my favourite.
Okay. Good night. Sorry, mate. Continue.
been there, done that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But a little while ago. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm talking about events at Nora Head on the Central Coast that involved selective perception and an attacking light swarm of lights. It was like this big light had come out of a ravine at Soldiers Point at Nora Head, and there were three young men and a young woman there on a spearfishing trip, camping there, and they got this material out of the ravine, and or two of the men had to keep the fire going, and it appeared that this ball of light had come out of the ravine, and out of that larger ball of light, these smaller objects would come and attack the two men, particularly the two men that had gone down in the ravine to retrieve this wood for the fire. The other man that hadn't gone down in the ravine, he could see these things coming out of this object and swarming and attacking the other two men. But the weird thing was the girl, she couldn't see anything. She could only witness what was obvious terror on the part of the young blokes. Now, back in the day and still today, of course, guys don't like to show too much fear in front of young women that are trying to impress, you know. But
Yeah.
these guys were so terrified. They were literally terrified. They were using sticks to try and fight off this swarm of orb-type things that seemed to be attacking them. Now, these things would eventually disappear, and the ball would go back down in the ravine, and the group ended up fleeing from the locality in the middle of the night, reporting it to the police. Now, you don't do that kind of stuff if you're a young teenager and start blubbering on about a ghost light or a flying saucer was attacking you in the middle of the night, you know. But the young girl couldn't verify that. She just observed the fear of the men, and the police were sufficiently convinced that something weird was going on. They weren't on drugs, they weren't drunk or anything like that, and they were so terrified that it took a lot for them to return to the site the next day. The police called my friend David Bushing, and they went to the location with the police and the group of young men very reluctantly, and described what had occurred, but they would not go anywhere near the ravine. They were too frightened. And what was not known at the time was that in 1973, this report came out privately to me, and I investigated it. a bloke and a lady were in a car parked doing what often happens in a car late at night. But they were both, well, one of them was in a marriage, so it was kind of like something that was a bit awkward to report. But they eventually told me about it. And what they saw, they weren't doing anything too devilish, but they observed a street light flickering. And this is 1973, and it was Nora Head, same location as this thing in 1975. And neither party knew anything about each other. Anyway, the couple in the car were looking at what's causing the street light flickering, and then they observed an object come up behind the hill out of the bushland, and out of that object, this was a very large object, and it started firing out these balls of light out of the object. And the bloke thought, wow, you know, he wanted to go closer, and she's saying, no, we're not going closer. She says, oh yeah, let's try to be close. So he tries to start the car won't start. He's trying to start the car, it still won't start. And at that point, terror takes over, and they're having mixed feelings. They want to get out of there, and then the object moves back into the bushland and disappears. But then they tried to start the car, and the car started straight away. So it's interesting to have that correlation of the large and the small at this one small locality at Nora Head. That was a really interesting sort of double barrel type of encounter situation of a large object or a larger object issuing smaller objects. And in the case in 1975 with the spearfishing group, a much smaller main object with smaller objects coming out of it. So it's an interesting correlation. So the UFO phenomenon is pretty complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Much straightforward.
Yeah. So with those guys that were getting attacked by these objects, so like were they like physically getting attacked by these things, or is it more like just like, you know, buzzing around their heads, like sort of like to try and ward them away?
Yeah, more like the latter, that it was sort of buzzing around. They didn't experience any physical damage to themselves, but it was certainly worrying them. You know, like it really frightened the hell out of them. So much so that they were really in fear, and they were virtually crying when they reported it to the police. They had so much fear, and they very reluctantly went back to the location. And these are blokes about between 16 and 18. They're not going to put on that kind of a performance for, particularly in front of a girl that was there, or the police, you know. But the police were sufficiently impressed with their apparent terror that they thought, we'll pass this on to the UFO group, and that's when they passed it on to my friend David Bushing, you know. And that period was in 75 was a period that we were actually on standby. We'd predicted that there was going to be an outbreak of cases. We weren't sure where, and I had my little airplane ticket ready to take off to Turingham and the North Coast and New England, because I was expecting stuff to happen, and sure enough, it did. And that predictability continued through to about 1978. And then it seemed to peter out and got very hard to predict after that, which is most unfortunate. But there seemed to be this regular cycle of events going on. So, yeah, interesting time.
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce back to your experience there at Mount Butler. There, like, what's going through your head there when you were sort of seeing this object above the house, sort of thing going on, and like, what were you thinking?
That wasn't Mount Butler. That was
Mount Butler.
Turingham.
Oh, sorry, Turingham.
Turingham. What's going through my head? Well, I'm wanting to know what it was. You know, like it didn't frighten me at the time. I was just sort of thinking there's something there, but then it goes away.
Were you like thinking like any concern for like the people in the house or anything like that? Like,
not really. Warwick being electronics technician. He kind of felt that it was, he thought maybe it was something that he was doing. Like he was playing around. He was like a radio ham as well, and was basically using electronic equipment, and broadcasting on different frequencies. He thought, well, maybe this attracted them, but it doesn't seem likely. But there were all sorts of different speculations as to why the events were happening there. But I was more interested in trying to get a documentation of what was actually happening without influencing other people, and also trying to drag down other students and faculty members and various debunkers and skeptics to the location so they would witness it themselves. And one of the most interesting ones, I won't give too much detail, so I don't want to embarrass the person. This is a very skeptical person at a high academic level, curious about building these UFOs at Sheringham. So he comes with me, and we're standing there in front of the corner store, and then the display starts, and all these vague objects going on, and he's looking at it, and he just seemed to be in a state of mild shock, I think. And he turns around and says, very interesting. Yeah, I'll be off now. And he gets into his car and drives back to Armidale. I thought, what the hell? To me, it was like ontological shock, like it was sort of kind of didn't quite fit his paradigm, and so he felt he's not comfortable with that, couldn't explain it, and didn't want to be too involved with it and get all caught up with it, and thought maybe his career path at the university might be sort of damaged, that kind of thing. So.
Oh, bugger, mate. I think a lot of people here will be going, oh, I wish I was there. I wish I could see something like that. Just to have something that's reoccurring all the time too, like that's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, well, that kind of repeatability is not too frequent, and there are localities around the world where that seems to take place, and it does attract a lot of interest. One of the most famous ones is in Norway at Hessdalen, and that seem to be mainly balls of light and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of the speculation there's been more towards natural explanations, that kind of stuff, but pretty strange, and it seems to be happening very, very frequently. And now there's increasingly a lot of fairly sophisticated efforts at field monitoring of a lot of locations around the world. And, I certainly encourage that. But, you do see those rather, very tedious kind of documentary shows and stuff like that tend to turn it into a bit of a theatre effort, sort of like entertainment, and tends to dumb it down a fair bit. But a lot of people react that way to the Skinwalker Ranch TV show. But despite the theatrics and whatever, I've seen sufficient in a lot of the accounts that have been described, even by the new owner, that there are too many correlations with the things that I experienced, even just at Sheringham and other places that I'm aware of, that are very hard to dismiss. And so I certainly encourage the efforts of trying to monitor those locations. And I guess the Skinwalker Ranch is the most visible area that we know of, but its history is becoming more and more notorious, that kind of stuff, and a lot of people have their own kind of belief systems about what's going on there. But that's the kind of thing that I certainly encourage. I gave a talk to an early UFO conference way back in 1975, 76. I called it UFO Flaps, basically an opportunity to do the science, conduct a repeatable experiment. Now, the repeatable experiment is the key to scientific method now. They say, there's nothing scientific about UFOs, but in actual fact there is. Now, a UFO flap and recurring UFO phenomena is the hallmark of a repeatable experiment. You can go in there and test it, monitor it, film it, get all sorts of multi-sensory equipment going. And there's a lot of places that are attempting to do that. A lot of researchers around the world that are right into that, and that's something that I've always advocated.
Yeah, so why isn't the whole scientific community like jumping on the chance of this? Like, this is something like it's obviously showing itself again and again, sort of thing, but yet it only seems to be like private organisations like Bob Bigelow buying out Skinwalker there to try and do his own evidence. But like, why isn't like multiple organisations getting together, this sort of thing, to try and figure out what's going on?
It's starting to happen very slowly, but all this requires deep pockets, and that kind of stuff, funding, that kind of stuff. A lot can be achieved at low cost, but ultimately it all comes down to equipment, manpower, time, technology. But there's an increasing range of equipment that's much more portable than it used to be. Some of the stuff that we dragged down to Turingham that we kind of borrowed, so to speak, from the various faculties, physics, chemistry.
Yeah.
What are you taking that for, Bill? Don't worry about it. I'll have it back on Monday. It's all good, Just look what I'm doing. That kind of stuff. We were doing that all the time,
Yeah.
And it was that kind of equipment now becoming much more innovative, and I guess the big example of that potentially could be the Project Galileo that's been started by Avi Loeb, the Harvard scientist. And he's not only looking for more of these objects out in outer space like Oumuamua that he advocates might be of an extraterrestrial nature. He's also advocating looking at objects that could be possibly from not from here in our own atmosphere, advocating a serious attempt to do that. But he doesn't want to look at any historical data. He doesn't want to look at any classified data either. He just wants to be able to collect it himself using equipment, monitoring equipment, that kind of stuff, and that's good. And so it'll be an interesting experiment, but I think you need to look at what's gone before as well, because there's a huge depth of data out there on previous attempts to investigate similar locations, such as my own experience at Turingham on the Dorrigo Plateau.
Yeah, definitely.
And I was definitely influenced somewhat by the fact that a year or two earlier I was reading reports by a psychiatrist published in the British Flying Saucer Review, or FSR, which was one of the premier magazines of the day. And he was writing up about something called the Woodstock UFO Festival. I'm talking about the area in New York State that was near the location of where the Woodstock Music Festival occurred. And back in the 60s and 70s, there was a major ongoing UFO flap area going on, very similar to Turingham. In fact, he started publishing it, the details, in about 1972. And here am I reading this thinking, oh, this is interesting. And then bang, I get handed on a plate Turingham a year later, almost showing the same sort of phenomena taking place. That's why I then go to a talk to a UFO conference about UFO flaps, using these localities as the mainstay of a repeatable experiment, the core of science, to examine it. And that's really what we should be doing. But again, it all takes money.
Yeah.
Time. And
no, that's fair enough. No, that's definitely fair enough. And hopefully we do sort of get some sort of, bit more of an idea what's going to be happening out there at Skinwalker, or even anywhere of these hotspots in Australia. But talking about hotspots there, I did have someone there asking, can you describe what possible hotspots are available in Tasmania? What's been going in Tasmania? Because you did mention that in the last time as well, that Tasmania seemed to be a bit of a point of interest.
Yeah, Tasmania. Tasmania was really lucky in the sense that it had a well-established group there that kicked off in about 1965, the Tasmanian UFO Investigation Centre, UFOIC, and it was one of the best organised groups anywhere in Australia as far as recording, documenting on an annual basis for many decades UFO phenomena right around Tasmania. So they were an excellent group, and they had a lot of really interesting accounts. That group is sort of most of the original players in the group have now since retired or stepped back, that kind of thing, and it's more of a I guess a social media type presence, website, that kind of stuff. And I think there is some investigation still going on. I make contact with some of the people from time to time, but when I looked at a lot of those locations, there's a lot of areas that seem to have recurring phenomena, like Medina and the middle of Tasmania in the Tablelands area up there. The thing about Tasmania is you don't realise how small the place is. You know, like here in New South Wales or in larger states, we're used to travelling vast distances. A vast distance for Tasmanian researchers is 20 or 30 kilometres down the road. So that, you know, like there's a lot of provincialism. No apologies to Tasmanians, but yeah, I looked into a couple of areas that had a lot of things going on, like what was euphemistically referred to as Highland Farm. That was a pseudonym given to it, where it was like Skinwalker, like Turingham, really weird phenomena going on, apparitional phenomena, balls of light, objects seen, beings seen, like a caravan parked on the property, and one of the people inside the caravan witnesses a being floating down through the top of the caravan skylight into the caravan, and seeing apparitions in colonial dress, like traditional ghosts, than other things that seem to be changing shape, that kind of thing, and a lot of UFO phenomena are as well associated with it as well. So that kind of area really interests me and attracts me to. So I shot it up to and managed to find out where Highland Farm was. Spent a bit of time there, but nothing happened while I was there.
Yeah, bugger.
Yeah, bugger. That's it. Yeah.
Oh, it was right place, right time, eh? And if you're lucky enough. Yeah. So I do have some other questions here from because I put the bit of a recap stream up there last night, and someone sort of asking the questions during that recap there, which obviously wouldn't have been noticed by us. But someone's asking if is Tully, Queensland still active in regards to has like any recent UFO or witness reports?
I'm not quite so aware of what's been happening in the last few years at Tully. It seems to be recurring from time to time, but the main period of activity for Tully was during the 60s and the 70s, a little less so in the 80s. But certainly the Queensland group with Cyril Gotzel and company, they would know a lot more about that as to how frequent it's going off. But Tully has been seen as one of those locations where UFOs seem to occur all the time, and from time to time I get people reporting stuff to me, but a lot of it's anecdotal. When you try to get beyond the anecdotal, it tends to wither away, and you don't get enough information to really encourage going up there and checking it out. But yeah, people keep telling me, and certainly the people, the Panisi family that owned the Horseshoe Lagoon, which was the focus of the famous 1966 case with George Pedley, they're implying that stuff keeps happening from time to time. But I guess they don't want to encourage too much sort of foot traffic going through there, because it's still a working farm, all that kind of thing.
Yeah. So obviously not too much happening at the moment, but obviously, yeah.
Well, it's like the anecdote I think I might have shared last time, that going to the corner store, or I said at the beginning of this conversation, talking to the person at Turingham's store and asking about anything strange UFO related happening, and said no, none of this stuff's happening around there, until they know who you are. If you're familiar to them and you've got their respect or their confidence, then they might open up to you. And in this particular case, when she'd already told me before she realised who I was that there was nothing happening there. As soon as she knew who I was, she was telling me, oh, they had a close encounter behind the store, behind the immediate still, only a month earlier. so,
Wow.
So, again, a lot of the UFO phenomenon is hidden. And I think people that get into these areas need to be respectful of the local communities and get their confidence and that kind of stuff. And don't step on too many toes or aggravate people, respect people and do the right thing and check out these locations. And quite often it requires a fair investment of time to figure out some of these localities. Patience is a virtue in the UFO game.
Oh, definitely.
I'm certainly Mr. Patient because I've been at it and still relatively sane after decades. So.
Well, you'd be considered sane anyway.
Yeah. Depends who you talk to.
Yeah. Look, respect's got to go a long way with this sort of stuff here, and it's like we were mentioning like in the last episode there, like the whole. God, I've lost myself now. The whole topic of the UFO there has been criticised, and all that sort of like the respect is like gone right out through the window there, and it's slowly building its way back up. And people, if you approach them with respect, they're going to sort of come forward with that, which is slowly happening now, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, your show, for example, people contacting and reporting their own experience. It's a great kind of thing. You can do it anonymously, or you can do it and have your name sort of linked to it or whatever. But that's difficult for a lot of people, depending on what circumstances they're in. And there's always been that long-term stigma associated with reporting things. But that stigma is certainly getting less and less. And I guess it depends on what you're talking about and what you're trying to report. Some people can be their own worst enemy, the way what they present, and that sometimes they can come across a little intense and perhaps don't apply common sense to some of the things that they're describing. And it's always best to check and also be aware of what's happening in your own environment and really critically assess what's actually occurring and look for possible explanations. Particularly, researchers like me, we get a bit jaded giving an astronomy lesson to somebody that's been looking and reporting night after night something that's popping up in the same location, and in your heart of hearts it's probably something astronomical. But try and let people down gently and that kind of stuff, and give them a good education.
Yeah, I've dealt with that a fair bit myself personally. They're like, people mistaking like a miscaptured insect while they're trying to take a photo or something. We get the streak of a bug going through and saying.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. Modern digital technology is really a wonderful thing. There's a lot of instantaneous photography going on, that kind of stuff, but it also has the potential for capturing a lot of artifacts that look good. One of the standard things in UFO photographs these days is the situation of people look at their photographs days later or a week later and they look out at Kef and they see something.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, like a classic lens flare or something like that.
Yeah, well, there was one I remember of a horse stud, and they had security cameras, and they would see what appeared to be an orb appearing, apparently frightening the horses. But then I was able to actually recreate that effect, and it was essentially drops of water on the camera lens capturing the light, and also spider's web creating what appeared to be movement and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there was some pretty weird things going on there, but I think you've got to have an open mind, but get led by the evidence, not by your own belief system.
Yeah, that's also a lot of people too. Like, keep an open mind, but also keep a critical thought on things, like you're saying. Like, you've got to rule out every other possibility of logical explanation before you go and throw a card of saying it's an alien craft or an alien being.
Yeah, well, I kind of work on a lot of people in this area tend to assume UFO first, and it's going to be a UFO no matter what, that kind of thing. Whereas I assume initially that it's most likely going to be something prosaic, something easily explainable.
Yeah.
Let the quality of the evidence tell me otherwise. And once you start looking at it, those really strong cases stand out very, very well and stand the test of time. So, yeah, there's some really striking cases out there.
Oh, without a doubt. Like, there's no doubt. There's definitely something going on out there and all that sort of stuff. But like, like we've just been saying, like you just can't assume that everything's UFO or I suppose it is UFO because unidentified at the time. But you know, it's it's got a explanation behind most of it, and that's the thing. Like you're saying, like people are gonna need to go and work, like figure out what's around their environment, and keep an eye on what's happening in the sky because things change throughout the year, and that like people misidentifying Venus of all things, like because they're not looking up enough or they're not paying much attention. And next minute, there's big bright light in the evening sky or morning sky, and what the hell is that? And freaking out, thinking some alien invasion, and it's like, well, hang on, nah, it's just Venus. It's been there for like weeks.
It even happens to experienced people often make mistakes.
Yeah, well, it's human.
Then they have to backtrack and try and rationalise it and push it aside.
Yeah. Oh, look, we all hate admitting that we're wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it's one of those things, I suppose. Like, yeah, keep an open mind, but keep your feet grounded, sort of thing, as well.
Yeah, I think I noticed a question earlier about the Westall school case and the photo, the Baldwin photo.
Yes, actually, that was one of the ones that's going to pop up there. The Bell, where does it go? The Baldwin Bell photo. If that was the same that was sighted at Westall.
Yeah. Again, if people look for Baldwin and Westall on my blog site, you'll see a number of references to the photograph case and to Westall. Now, I've talked to a lot of the Westall witnesses, and Westall to me was kind of like a sleeper case. There was a little bit of publicity to begin with at the time when it took place in 1966, but then we became increasingly aware over the decades that there was more to this case than met the eye, but most people were reluctant to describe it, and there was a lot of, I guess, ridicule at the time and that kind of thing, and but ultimately it proved to be a real solid sleeper case. Now we've got hundreds of people, and it was rather difficult to track down a lot of witnesses to Westall over the decades. It was the initial handful, but then eventually people started to investigate it in more detail, and with the advent of social media and stuff like that, it made it a hell of a lot easier to track people down.
Yeah.
Of course, Shane Ryan focused on that one single case, and that had a lot of benefit because provide, along with social media, the opportunity to flush out a lot of witnesses.
Yeah.
And, one of those was Victor Zachary, who his testimony was really interesting because he was the one described. You probably see it in the documentary or various shows have been put to air, where there was a kid that actually got so close to it he was thinking about touching the object on the ground.
Yeah.
And then decides he can feel heat, the two objects on the ground. So I went to the location with him and tried to do a forensic reconstruction of what he saw and did a drawing. And I see my drawing pop up all over the place, attributed to all sorts of people. But it just shows two objects and a number of kids, just a sketch, but done, I think, fairly accurately to Victor's description, done on location where I interviewed him on site, and it shows that him and the other kids near the fence line with other kids and the teacher near the fence line. He ignored the entreaties of the teacher not to go over the fence. He said, "Bugger this, I'm going over the fence," and goes over the fence. But then has second thoughts about touching one of the objects that he's closest to. And then as he's backing off, they both rise up. One goes up and does a rotation around a Cessna passing overhead, and the other one takes off. It goes down into the Grange area. You know, it's a story that's well known now
Yeah.
in many ways. But what's interesting and not well known was that why did Victor not join all the other kids and rush down chasing the UFO that went down to the Grange? And he went home to lunch, have lunch in the middle of this sighting. You think, why would you do that? He says, because I'd seen it before, up close. And it was only a year or two earlier that he's in the middle of the night raiding a local factory to knock off a couple of wooden pallets to make a billy cart out of. And he's there planning to go down and take a few wooden pallets away, as you do as a kid back in the day.
Yep.
And this object appears, and it's actually flying along on edge. And to him, it was identical to what he saw a couple of years later in the middle of the Westall school sighting during the day.
Wow.
So he saw it up pretty close. And the closest thing that was similar to it is if you look at the Baldwin photograph, there's a long way of getting back to the Baldwin photograph. The Baldwin photograph is looking on its side. It's a strange photo, and a lot of people think it's a bicycle bell or whatever or something like that. But I've known the guy that took the photograph, Jim Kiverley, passed away quite recently, and I've known the family and him for more than a decade or two, and we've had a lot of deep and heavy conversations over the years, and I'm fairly impressed with it. You know, each individual thing, you can't look at it as that's proof, but there's always a bit of an element of doubt, that kind of thing. But the Baldwin photograph, I think, is fairly impressive, and it does seem to show what some of the witnesses described at Westall. It only occurred a couple of days apart from the Westall case, and it was because of the CSIRO scientist that was obsessed with the Westall case, obsessively calling them at all hours of the night, that he eventually made the photograph available to the UFO group of the day, and then it leaked into the media, and then he says all hell broke loose, and the military started calling. And they wanted to know about this photograph, and so there was a lot going on in Victoria at the time in 1966. 1966 was an amazing year.
Yeah, it
really
seems.
was amazing.
Wow, mate. Look, we're punch of a time here, so mate, look, if you're interested still, mate, we might like to get you back for a part 3 on this and continue this on, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that'd be fine at some point. Yeah, you've got to check out your kids and see whether they've crashed.
Yeah, I don't know where they've gone. They've probably gone out wandering, trying to find some chocolate down the corner shop or something like that, you know.
One would hope not.
Yeah, it's not the first time they've tried it, so.
Okay.
But yeah, mate, look.
You.
Look, mate, we'll definitely get you back on for a part 3 if that's all right with you, mate, and we'll continue on, and hopefully no interruptions with the kids the next time, but is what it is.
Everything's all good with the family as well.
Yeah, look, I think she'll be recovering well, and thanks to everyone who did get concerned on that, but look, mate, right, thank you very much for coming and joining again tonight. We'll sort this video thing out and try and get something working properly one day. I'm trying to do this on a budget, but it is what it is. It's working, but yeah, thank you very much, mate, for coming on the show, mate. It's absolutely a pleasure having you on.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, mate.
Take care, mate.
Cheers, mate. Catch you later. And that will do it, folks, for this episode of Encounters Down Under. I hope you enjoyed the show, and remember, you can also get involved in the show by joining the Facebook page and getting in on the live streams. Also, please be sure to share with your friends and family to help us grow and potentially find our next guest on the show. If you or you know someone who has had an encounter, please get in touch with me through our Facebook page via Messenger or email at australianufosighting@outlook.com.au. I look forward to seeing you on the next Encounter Down Under. Hooroo!